Okay, great. Thank you guys so much, everyone, for coming to this entire conference, especially for coming to mine. I feel very touched to be here today. Game Games in general and gaming is something I've been passionate about for a long time, and I'm only beginning to explore it in an academic sense. So I feel remarkably lucky to be able to be here today. Today, I want to talk about the concept of abundance in gaming, specifically in unfacilitated or GM-less gaming. And the title of my presentation is You Can Always, and we will get into where I pull that phrase from. Additionally, my cat is with me today, and so he may make an appearance once or twice or thrice. My name is Raegan Harvey. I am a master's student at Texas Women's University, where I am pursuing my master's in English. Let's dive in once it clicks. Great. Okay, so my goals for today's presentation are, I want to be very clear up front. Although I will be discussing unfacilitated games and sort of the merits of those games and what we can learn from them, this is in no way a condemnation of GM'd games. I believe that games are useful for a variety of purposes, and they have strengths and weaknesses when it comes to those purposes. This is just an exploration of one kind of purpose for a game and one kind of game for a purpose. The agenda that I have today, I'm going to briefly review the article or the book that introduced me to these concepts of scarcity and abundance in a more grounded way, and then go over the classic banking model of teaching from Paulo Freire. From there, I'll go into how we see scarcity occur in gaming and at the gaming table. I want to briefly cover three sides, though not comprehensive entirely, but three sides of abundance and how to implement those three sides of abundance into gaming. So I first stumbled upon the idea of abundance and abundance mindset from Candace Fujikani's book, Mapping Abundance. I had previously heard of the idea of scarcity mindset, abundance mindset, in a very ephemeral, aspirational buzzword tone of voice. It was in this book, which hinges largely on decolonial thought, decolonial theory in regards to Hawaii. It was in this book that Candace Fujikani really elaborated on the groundedness of what abundance can look like. I have here, I've pulled a couple of quotes from the introduction of that book to sort of give more of a concrete sense of these concepts. So she writes that the alibi of capital is scarcity. Its myth is that of a primordial scarcity overcome only by labor regulated and disciplined by the private ownership of the means of production. And this was actually quoted from David Lloyd in Fujikani's work. She goes on to say, in contrast to scarcity, economies of abundance create the conditions for people to see beyond the competition for scarce resources to our own regenerative capacity to cultivate abundance. This is a lot to chew on, certainly. But to me, whenever I read this, I think of Candace Fujikani's conception or belief of abundance looking like pushing back against this disregard or discarded knowledge and not discarded resources and discarded capacities that we have, capacities for abundances that we have. This idea of the value, returning to the value of knowledge that has been disregarded or discarded, instantly made me think of Paulo Freire, as well as critical pedagogy and pedagogy of the oppressed, his seminal work. Oh man, there. So Freire's banking model, which I trust some of us are familiar with already, posits that knowledge is deposited from instructor who holds all of the information into students who are passive, empty vessels. In this model of education, students have virtually no agency. there is an unbelievably asymmetrical power dynamic in which the teacher unilaterally disperses information down to students. This emphasizes high control of how students act, how they interact with one another, and how they learn as a whole. This is something that has been widely critiqued, and for very good reason, as we learn more and more about the many ways of being and ways of knowing. Earlier today, we heard from a presenter about autistic adults and their use of board games, and that's one phenomenal example of how neurodivergency can affect different ways that people interact with the world and how they learn and how they play. Having this sort of prescriptive banking model of one way to interact with the world is stifling and rarely effective. So we can see aspects of the banking model of teaching show up at the gaming table at times, I would argue. So returning back to the tenets of what we thought of as being the elements of a banking model, we can see some of those here at the gaming table, where GMs teach systems. Their responsibility is to make sure that their players understand how rules work, and then to adjudicate and provide rulings on how different aspects of the rules may be implemented. It's their job to maintain tone. It's their job to manage the story. It's their job to play anything and everything that is not the players. This is, of course, an unbelievable burden, an unbelievable amount of work that is placed on the GM, as well as a great deal of power with that responsibility. These ideas of what the GM should do, I believe, are informed by and then go in to inform different tensions or concerns that may come up when we play. When you sit down to play and you're meeting for the first time in a month, and you probably won't meet with these people for another month because we're all adults and we're all so busy, there's a tension of how much time are we going to have today? There's the tension of, well, the only person I can find things out from is the GM, who is the single central storyteller who holds all the information. This can raise questions of, what should play look like? How should I move through this space? How should we interact with each other? And from that, how do we answer those questions, and who gets to decide? As we see with the banking model, and as we see in many GM'd games, that comes down to the GM gets to decide. So in contrast, we move into unfacilitated games, which do not have a GM. Instead, they disperse those typical responsibilities amongst players. They outsource to tools, such as using tarot cards or dice rolling mechanics to increase risk when needed. But mainly, it is a collaborative GM style. Some have argued that rather than saying GM-less unfacilitated games should be called GM-full, in that we have multiple GMs all at once. So this article from Eric Stein, in fact, says that GM-less games dislocate responsibilities from the traditional site of the game master and then redistribute them equally between members of the table. This is a very troubling concept in some ways, not in that it is negative and bad and unlikely to ever work, but rather in that it is challenging. It's very unconventional from how I believe many of us would have learned to play board games. This is where I was reminded so strongly of Freire. I have this quote here from the Freire Institute, which has a wonderful spread of his ideas and ideology presented in a more accessible fashion and more accessible language. So here they say, to enter into dialogue, or for our purposes, to enter into gameplay, presupposes equality amongst participants. Each must trust the others. There must be mutual respect and love, care and commitment. Each one must question what he or she knows and realize that through dialogue, through play, existing thoughts will change and new knowledge will be created. obviously, this is very counter to what we saw with the banking model, in which knowledge can be created by players, by students, rather than only dispensed from the instructor. This is where the crux, I think, of why unfacilitated games can be so challenging comes into play, which is GMs are trusted. They are the singular trusted figure at the gaming table who is able to be responsible and keep everything in balance. Sometimes, as much as we may be loath to admit it, there are aspects of the people that we play with that we don't entirely trust. GM-less games are a practice in trusting one another and treating one another with equal respect, equal trust, equal desire for collaboration. I'm taking a look at my time, and I promise I will do my best not to go over today. Yes, just checking in. So in addition to that abundance of trust that we need to be working from, there's also an abundance of knowledge. So when we are trying to work outside of a rhetoric of scarcity and towards a rhetoric of abundance, I believe that that means practicing, noticing what we do have as far as resources in abundance, namely what we all share or we all have independently, our experiences. So in Avery Alder's Designing for Empathy workshop, she declares that personal experiences of game designers are not just a resource that they have, but an integral strength that they bring to the table. No pun intended. Here is a screenshot that I pulled from the workshop resources that were attached, in which she lays forth this exercise for designers to identify key topics and themes that they have personal stake in. And this is what she asks them to build games around. So it is from this belief in one another that we bring special, important, unique experiences and knowledge to the table, that we can see the value in one another's contributions once we have trusted one another to bring those experiences to the table. And then finally, abundance in choice. So Avery Alder says in the Designing for Empathy workshop that one of the ways that games can create sincere emotional experiences is by introducing fraught situations and then letting the players come up with their own solutions, rather than the kind of riddle that you introduce in a dungeon 4 hours into a game session where there's one solution and everyone's exhausted and no one wants to play anymore because there's one answer that you're supposed to give. Instead, Alder says, in order to have meaningful play, allow there to be multiple solutions, allow players to create their own solutions. Furthermore, Avery Alder and Ben Rosenbaum go a step further in this in their game or their game system, No Dice, No Masters, where they completely eliminate any amount of outsourcing, as I mentioned earlier, outsourcing to tarot decks, card decks, dice rolling mechanics to help determine different aspects of how the story progresses. In No Dice, No Masters, there are no such tools. Instead, every choice that is made is driven by collaborative conversation. There's a heightened degree of consent. Everyone has to be hyper aware of the choices that are being made in the narrative as they are being made, and everyone contributes to the direction of a plot. So when implementing these tenets of abundance into gameplay, this can look, I have 3 examples of how this can look. As far as implementing abundance when creating spaces for players to direct the narrative and direct play, safety tools can be a really useful resource for this. They can help communicate goals and negotiate expectations. And more than that, they create a shared idea and sense of community. I have one fantastic example from J Dragon's Wanderhome, which actually has built-in safety tools called journeying tools, one of which begins with the phrase, "You can always," showing players, no matter what happens in play, no matter what may be occurring, no matter where you may be at mentally, you can always do these things. These are always tools that you can reach for. These tools are in abundance. Next, we have different ways to set tone. You can use unfacilitated games such as A Quiet Year, which the Adventure Zone did in their prequel arc for Ethersea, to collaboratively build a world, build history, build lore, build the landscape of world, even a map of a world. This in-game creates a shared sort of document where everyone's contributed, and out-of-game creates a tone in which everyone can be sharing. This will help in the future to move towards a continually collaborative spirit of play. And finally, I have implementing openness. This is much more of a philosophical takeaway, but it is what I believe is the root of this key discussion, which is the willingness and desire for your players to share with you, and a willingness and openness for what they share with you to change things, for it to have an impact on how the game progresses. Brennan Lee Mulligan, in one of the talkback episodes for a season of his actual play show, Dimension 20, said this: PCs do world build because you use your focus and your attention to world build. You go, tell me more about that. You being like, no, I need you to listen to me right now, suddenly makes something that could have been two-dimensional have to come to life. Because of this shared nature, because of the attention to where players are lending their attention and focus, this is how we can create more dynamic, lively, collaborative, and whole, abundant stories. Thank you so much for your time and patience today. I have here, oh, I completely forgot to mention it. I have here a QR code which you can scan, which will link directly to my slide deck. You can also reach me by email, which I have listed here. And I also have all of my works cited. Thank you guys so much for your time.